Good evening and welcome to this first Bloodaxe launch event of 2024. Tonight we have Poetry Across the Generations. We have Fleur Adcock launching her collected poems covering 60 years of work from her first collection published in 1964 right through to the new poems at the end of the book, which are published now in 2024. Then we have Kerry Hardie, Irish poet, who will be with us from Kilkenny tonight, County Kilkenny, with her 9th collection, We Go On. And we have Aoife Lyall, who's at the moment in Dublin, and she's going to be reading from her 2nd collection the day before. And Aoife and Kerry will be also launching both their collections on Thursday night in Hodges Figgis bookstore in Dublin at 6 o'clock. So anyone watching from Dublin, do go along and meet them and listen to them reading more of the work there. So we're going to start off with Fleur Adcock, and she's going to tell you about the book and read some of the poems from her collected poems. So Fleur, please welcome Fleur.
Hello, can you hear me? Yes? No?
Yes.
Yes, okay. I'm not going to tell you about the book because Neil's told you about it. It's a big fat book known as Fatso in our family. I'm going to start with I'm going to read a mixture of old and new poems. So I'll start with a rather old one called Things that I often tend to read to brace myself for anything minor that might happen during a reading. Things. There are worse things than having behaved foolishly in public. There are worse things than these miniature betrayals, committed or endured or suspected. There are worse things than not being able to sleep for thinking about them. It's 5 a.m. All the worst things come stalking in and stand icily about the bed, looking worse and worse and worse. And the next poem is called The Fur Line, and I'm reading it in honor of my very new great-granddaughter, born 5 days ago in New Zealand, and she's called Mira Fleur. So I thought this was an appropriate one to read because it mentions great-grandchildren. It refers to a time when I was a married student, 19 years old, earning some holiday money. When I was working in the factory, stitching open-ended zip fasteners at one of a row of sewing machines, someone brought in some kittens in a box. I didn't wait to consult my husband. I travelled home on the tram after work with Jonathan snuggled in my bosom. We had a cat before we had a child. Sally and Midge, Pussy Willow, Ada, all that fluff got into our synapses, transmitting itself down generations from nerve to nerve, or however it works. Tiger and Snowflake, Marigold and Prince, too late to say I've gone off predators in favour of protecting the bird life when I've bred a tribe of ailurophiles. It's out of my hands. This is the future. Brucey, Melba, Sasha, Lady Gaga. It's no surprise that my great-granddaughters grow up co-sleeping with their mother's cats. Well, in this case, she won't be doing that because her mother has dogs. A few years ago, I became obsessed with Ellen Wilkinson, who was a bit of a heroine in our family. My father met her at a conference and stood just behind her in the group photograph, and we were not allowed to forget this. She was the Minister of Education in those days, 1946. She died in 1947. And she was the MP for Jarrow. Before that, she joined in the Jarrow March from Jarrow to London. So I'm going to read 2 sections from a longer poem called The March. This first section is called The Baths Hall. Ellen Wilkinson in the foam bath at Barnsley sees only the road, which at the moment is all I can see myself, being uncertain as to exactly what the women's foam bath was, except that she had it all to herself while 200 aching men from Jarrow wallowed and soothed their feet in the men's pool, also specially heated for their arrival. The road from Wakefield to Barnsley, that is, nearly 10 miles of it, and she walking in front until they arrived at Barnsley Town Hall for a meal of hot potato pie, and the mayor proclaiming, "Everything that Barnsley can do for you will be done." But before too long, Ellen's puny shoulders emerged from the foam anadyomene. She may have been a legend. She was not a myth. And the second one from this sequence is called The Mascot. Then there was the dog, a Labrador, they thought, or a mongrel, or someone said a terrier. Does that look like a terrier to you? But certainly a gift to the reporters. Paddy its name was, or Jarrow, a stray that tagged onto the march. Or it was called Peter and belonged to a woman in heaven. Once it nearly pulled Ellen off her feet. Oh, they liked that, the journalists. Petite Miss Wilkinson trying to keep up, titiping along on her little tootsies, taking 3 steps to every stride of the men, hanging on grimly to the mascot's leash as they formed up to march into a town. A Labrador will do for the sculpture posterity is going to erect. This is one of the new poems, fairly new. It's called In the Desert, and it's written in memory of my young second cousin, Lance Bombardier Matthew Hatton, who died in 2009 in Afghanistan. And it was the recent events in Afghanistan that made me think of it again and write this poem. As the Taliban surged back into Kabul and the international correspondents looked more exhausted with every broadcast, but not as exhausted as the refugees, I thought of my young second cousin Matthew, one of the 457 flown back from Afghanistan in sealed coffins to Wootton Bassett, and then, in Matthew's case, to York for his military funeral in the Minster, after which the gun carriage paraded him on a tour of the packed streets before beginning its sedate procession to the cemetery, while we, the mourners, plus van loads of soldiery, sped off ahead, at a pace Matthew would surely have preferred, with sirens and flashing lights to get there first. All of which might have been designed to persuade his parents that being blown up by a bomb at 23 was a worthy destiny, an opinion they are perhaps revising. And the last one in this section is a shortish and oldish poem called Strangers on a Tram. It's about the time when my parents and my sister and I went back to New Zealand after the war, 1947, and had to settle down, and for Marilyn and me, learn to be young New Zealanders. And I like the idea of Strangers on a Tram. I like perverting an existing title and changing it to something similar. But it's really my mother who's the heroine of this story. I was on a tram going home from school when who should get on it but my mother, wearing the brown tweed costume Mrs. Dowell passed on to her before we left England. This wouldn't have been so bad except that she'd let the hem down because Mrs. D had said skirts were going to be longer. Well, if so, New Zealand had not yet heard. Mothers were supposed to be stout with grey hair and not go around predicting the new look. There were some girls on the tram I sort of knew. I pretended this woman was a stranger. Amazingly, she pretended the same, apart from giving me a furtive wink. How dare she have the cheek to understand me? It was hard to work out what to resent.
Thank you, Fleur. And we're now going to hear from Kerry Hardie.
Good evening. Hello. Thank you, Fleur. I'm going to start with, this is quite a dark book. When you get to my age, I expect Fleur has the same experience, you find that there are a lot of coffins coming into your life. But this is one I wrote for a friend of mine who was dying of motor neuron. And it's also about the illusion you have that you're going to grow up, or I have, that someday I would actually grow up and I would be able for all the things that adults were supposed to be able to. And that hasn't happened to me yet. And I'm wondering how it has come to this when it still feels as though we're just starting out. And sometime quite soon, we may learn what it is we are meant to be doing. And his eyes are very tired and very innocent. A man who is simply worn out by it all, trusting us to be there, to say goodbye without saying goodbye, to sit for a while resting briefly inside his great frailty, then reverse ourselves out of what's left of his life. Life being that which we carry around with us, each of us living inside it, or maybe it living inside us, tied to the meat and bone part of ourselves, which is all that we are except for everything else, everything passionate and raw and belonging to us alone. Then I'm going to go to a poem called The Ground Under My Feet, which is sort of connected with the illusion that I'm going to grow up when I haven't. It's trying to stop getting wherever I thought I was going to get. The ground under my feet. The morning light lies on hummocky fields, early ploughing. On the stretch of the slope, a new lamb rises, staggers. I need to cross over into some place where no one expects me to know what I'm doing. Some place where I'm not even trying to understand or explain why life matters and ploughing, ordinary, earthy things, the need to paint feet onto angels. The last line I sort of owed to a poet called Deirdre Brennan, who was the first one who really pointed out to me that Christian or Western Christian angels very rarely have feet. They have great swathes of drapery around what should be their feet. I think maybe they couldn't make up their mind about what they were doing, the same way as they don't seem to be able to make up their mind about what sex angels are. This one will chime for Fleur because it's also Afghanistan. I remember the Americans pulling out of Vietnam, and it was a great shock to see it happening again in Afghanistan, because once you'd seen it once, you thought somehow we'd learn how to do it better. It's called We Go On. I just heard the news. There's a band of, and I should say, I was also on Ackle Island, which is the furthest island west, or one of the furthest in the Atlantic before you reach America. There's a band of black weather under the rim of the sky, then a shimmer of light spreading the face of the sea. A man walks a dog, and gulls drape themselves on the unseen flow of bright air. And it feels like everything's happened already, and everyone's fighting to board the last plane. Though the man is still walking the dog, and more gulls settle and stud the roof of an empty shed. And maybe it's always been this way, and all of us, sure of our own redemption, though it's dark out there, we'll still muddle through, and it's somebody else who'll fall off the edge of the world. And I finished this section with news from a poem I wrote, the only lockdown poem I wrote, which was on the day they announced we were locked down. And I'd been sent a transcription of a record that happened in Kilkenny in 1348, which was the year when the Black Death hit Kilkenny hardest. Kilkenny is full of plague pits because the roads to Waterford and Dublin were so bad that it had no immunity. So when the Black Death hit, people died like flies. This is the record written down by a man called Friar John Klein. Most of it is his words, mine come in at the end. News from Ireland, 1348, the Black Death. Now this is John. And because of fear and horror, men scarcely ventured to discharge works of piety and mercy, namely visiting the sick and burying the dead. The pestilence gathered strength in Kilkenny during Lent. There was scarcely a house in which only one died, but commonly man and wife with their children, all going one way, namely crossing to death. Now I, Friar John Klein of the Order of Minors and Convent of Kilkenny, have written in this book these noteworthy events that I know by faithful eyewitness or by worthy reliable report. Unless the writing should perish with the writer and the work fail together with the worker, I am leaving parchment for the work to continue. If by chance in the future a man should remain surviving, and anyone of the race of Adam should be able to escape this plague and live to continue this work I have commenced. It is evening, it is springtime, in the week that follows Easter, and I listen in Kilkenny in the year of 2020, and I hear them from their plague pits, and their words are clear and simple. Do not speak to us of hardship. Lift your spirits to the spring. John Klein's work, incidentally, was continued in a different hand, so we have to assume that he too went to the plague pits. That concludes my first bit. Aoife.
Aoife, yes. Can you join us, Aoife?
Hello. Thank you very much for that, Kerry. I'm a little bit croaky, as you can hear. But I wrote a lot about lockdown, and I'm actually starting my set with a very similar theme to Kerry's. And it's the title poem of the collection. The day before. We go to the homeware store. It has a cafe. We comment on the tiger lamp, the nautical clock, the sheepskin rug. When I walk through the aisle of mirrors, each one grabs a piece of me for itself. Limbs savaged from my torso, head nowhere to be found. I find frames for paintings waiting to be hung, and glasses to replace the ones we clean until they crack. And the reason I called the collection The Day Before was because everybody has one, whether it was lockdown or a seismic event in their own lives. And I find in those days you remember the smallest, almost insignificant details, as if your mind or your body knows that something is about to happen to change your concept of normality. Moss. We thought it was pen at first, or paint. A dab under the chin, worked under the nails, found in the folds of elbows, the backs of knees. But no, we have started to moss. We see it everywhere. The woods, the parks, the playgrounds, parents trying to hide it under hats and gloves. children picking it off each other like scabs. Some compare colours, trace the lines as islands join to islands, form their soft continents. Advice arrives on the wind like spores. Use less water, get more sunlight. Consider introducing competitive plants. We steer clear of sulfates, scrub added in the bath and shower, swap our sheets for sand and gravel, but still it comes. And soon we start to see whole families covered in the stuff. They move slowly, erratic, glacial, curl up under slides and seesaws, become benchmarks and bollards, milestones and street sculptures until those in charge are forced to admit to the rest of us, all hanging by a thread. And we're still waiting. This is a poem that I wrote maybe 8 to 10 weeks in. I am in Dublin now, but I'm based in Scotland, and so I wasn't able to be here with family. Bath night. I worry the dry skin on your scalp with lathered fingers. Tilt your chin and rinse the suds away, just like my mother. But she was quicker than this, nails firmer too. Love so fierce it could hurt. Her left hand held to my forehead like a prophet, her right its weekly baptism. Hair wet, hip hoisted, I pull the plug and drain the Irish Sea. Boats moored, planes grounded, I carry you across the reclaimed land. Set you by the fire she keeps burning through the night. The train. You peer over his shoulder and under his arm, impatient for the train that will carry us to London, Edinburgh, America, Australia, the moon. On my knees, I coax you to sit on kitchen chairs lined up against the wall. Coats on, hats in hand, we wait as he conducts the final checks, scrutinizes the sidings, the signal of the footbridge, makes the line secure. And then the train arrives, plucked from the plumes of tissue paper it sends into the sky. A steam train, all red and black. He sets it on the tiny track so we can see it go. Hear the click-a-clack-a-click-a-clack-a-click, click-a-clack-a-click-a-clack-a-click, click-a-clack-a-click-a-clack-a-click. He asks for the tickets we spent the morning making, and we step across the yellow lines I painted on the floor. We spend all afternoon on that train, and oh, the places we go and the people we see with our tinfoil sandwiches and cups of juice until it is time for dinner and bath and bed. And when we sit, too weary now to make believe without you, and we watch the train speed round and round its tiny track, too big and too small to leave out overnight, we put it away, shake the coal dust from our hair before we go to sleep. And the final poem I'll read in this set is called Wildflowers. It's for my husband on our 10th anniversary. They grow in fits and starts, scattered from a spare box you unearth in the garage, out of the soil you de-stoned for months and sieved and nourished with compost and topsoil you mixed by hand. At first, we do not know if they will grow, or what is weed or flower, or when to give them water, or how they will survive. Then other things need doing, and still they burst through and bloom, and still we call them wildflowers. The way we say love to mean petals, pollen, stamen, seed. You pick them for me, for our anniversary, and your wild abandon fills the crystal vases we were given all those years ago. Up close you marvel at the variety of the flowers, the complexities of their form, at their ability to grow and yet to know, to say they would not be here if not for us. I look to our children, flowers stirring in their roots, our love in their wild hearts.
Thank you, Aoife. And before we go on to the second half, just to mention that we've got the books which the poets are reading from are listed on the YouTube page below the screen that you were looking at. So do click on those afterwards and order the books if you like the readings. We're now going to come back to Fleur, who celebrated her 90th birthday just a week or so ago. And that's the reason why we publish the collected poems now, in order to celebrate 60 years of her poetry and 90 years of her life. So, Fleur.
Thank you. Yes, gosh. I'm going to begin with the poem. Sorry. I'm going to begin with a recent poem from the beginning of lockdown. And it's about the foxes in our neighbourhood in North London. My neighbours and I began to notice that our gardens were being invaded by the local foxes, who were using them for things like a nursery or a picnic area. And we got a bit sick of it. Notice to foxes. Take back your big green foam rubber ball and the red one with teeth marks and the shuttlecock. Take the leather sandal kidnapped from next door. Take your chewed KFC packaging, plus the sachet of sauce, the paper napkin, and the surgical mask you scavenged from the pavement. Replace the mountain of earth you dug out from under the roots of our sycamores and the panel of fencing you knocked over on the way to trampling my bedding plants, snapping off tall foxgloves at the root and dragging down my Rosamundi. Go squealing and scrapping in some other garden with all your trappings. You have ceased to be cute. This is another garden poem. I've written over the years a lot about the creatures in my rather ordinary suburban garden, but the inhabitants have become fewer and fewer as the years went by. This is one about bees, and they're not bumblebees, but the other kind. It's called Bee's Nest. Bumble, not honey, and not a hive. Ignore those trim little boxes, fitted with a glass inner lid for viewing, and an entry tunnel of the right gauge and Friends of the Planet catalogues. Such things may do the trick for blue tits with their predictable minds. This bee won't be invited into your parlour. She'll build in your compost heap. She'll squat in a disused mouse hole, or she's a cross noise buzzing inside the lawn so that you desist from using clippers, and an ever larger moss-thatched skull rises from the earth like the green man, his head crowning, being slowly born. With luck, it will be in a summer rich with visitors, so that a child may find herself transfixed by a procession of bees, all in the house uniform, hopping in and out of the grass just like that, to go browsing in the buddleia or shove their snouts into yellow toad flags, until they or their clone kin zoom back unerringly to the secret trapdoor that gives access to their waxen dome. But you worry that you haven't enough flowers in your garden to feed them, and that being more rare now, they'll never come back after this year's nest has sagged into ruin, and they don't come back. Another fairly recent poem is one of many of mine for friends who have died during lockdown, or either as a result of the COVID or just by coincidence because they'd reached that age. This is in memory of a good friend of mine, Jackie Sims, who was my poetry editor before there was Neil, before there was Bloodaxe. And we did two things together, not just editing my poems, but an enterprise of her own that you'll hear about. Just called Jackie, in memory of Jacqueline Sims, 1940 to 2021. Let's go back in time, Jackie, now that the present is not much fun, to the menagerie you proposed, entitled The Oxford Book of Creatures. The range would be from whale to amoeba, we agreed, Moby Dick to cell DNA. The whole of literature was eligible, although with a limit on cats and dogs. I was to find the poems, you the prose. I plodded through alphabetical shelves in libraries. You consulted friends and turned the project into a party. Our final editorial meeting was like a horizontal version of Varnishing Day at the Academy, with photocopies as the exhibits. They spread all over the floor of my study in loops and chains and winding circuits, overlapping, sparking connections, wandering in and out of categories. We crawled among them, tweaking the order, introducing them to each other. Darwin and Pliny and D.H. Lawrence, Beatrix Potter in bed with some fleas, Richmal Crompton's William leading a posse of rats, one of Drake's mariners dining on a fowl whose flesh is like a fat goose. We call it a penguin. I'll sit with your checked rug over my knees. Who else would think of arriving for lunch with a rug instead of flowers? Thank you, dear Jackie, for inviting me aboard your ark. I could have read a whole sequence of elegies, but I'm not going to. I'm going to switch suddenly to something a little bit unseasonal. It's called The Other Christmas Poem. I was asked to write a poem for a pamphlet about Christmas, and it wasn't exactly my thing, but I offered them one, and then I thought, no, that won't do, and I wrote this one instead. Or you might prefer to read about the Christmas when, after all the hosting and feasting, we finally got the kids off to bed, and the rest of us, the grown-ups, if that's an accurate designation, opened up another case of wine and put on some Rolling Stones records. I think it was Ruth, a friend of a friend, who found the room a bit overheated and made the decision to take her top off, something it seemed she was given to doing at the slightest provocation. Her husband greeted this with tolerance, and before too long had removed his shirt. Several other people shed theirs. One of the women undid her dress with a vaguely absent-minded air. The dancing hotted up. Ruth took off her bra. Someone stepped casually out of his trousers. You can see the way this is going. By the time Alex tiptoed upstairs for more wine from the stash in his study, the children, thank God, were sleeping soundly. He was the only adult in the house wearing so much of his underpants. Ah, what a memorable party we'd reminisce in the years that followed, thinking of the camaraderie and of how our necks had been stiff with the strain of never glancing below anyone's waist. And I'll finish with a valedictory poem about, it's called Care, and so it's about the ferryman who, or boatman perhaps, or shipman, who conducted the souls of the dead across the Styx into the other world. Where is Dr. Shipman when we need him to ferry us across the fatal stream and land us gently on Elysium? Shipman, boatman, ferryman, Whatever the craft he plies to help us cross the river, we seem to have been waiting here forever. How did we get the timetable so wrong? Things are becoming vague and we're not strong. Life was okay, but it went on too long. When we've forgotten how to keep afloat, scoop us up, Doctor, in your kindly boat and carry us across the final moat.
Thank you, Fleur. And very delightful to hear all those new poems. I'm sure everyone who knows your work will be delighted to hear all those fresh new poems from your collected poems. We're now going to hear from Kerry Hardie.
Thank you, Fleur. I had a residency some years ago in Switzerland, and we all arrived on the same day. There were about 5 of us. I know the exact year because it was the year of 9/11, which happened at the end of this residency. So it was quite interesting sitting around with a Pole, a Moldovan, an Egyptian, and us watching the Twin Towers. But this is arrival day. And at that stage, I didn't actually know where, everyone knows where Moldova is now, or mostly if you follow Ukraine at all. But at that stage, I didn't actually know much about Moldova, though we visited it later. And we made friends with this extraordinary woman called Valentina German-Tasleon. I'm still not getting her name right. And she was stubbornly proud of her country, which had been ruined by army after army, which had all marched over. I mean, in the Second World War, they were first the Germans walked over them, then the Russians walked over them, and then this has been going on throughout history. So they said they were used to it. But anyway, it's called at the Chateau de Lavigny, Switzerland, and it was interesting that this is happening in a neutral country. She has changed and put on makeup. The flowers on the marquetry table wait carefully quiet as her face. She says she is the editor of Moldova's premier literary journal. The elegant Pole who shoots art films, long, slow takes in Paris cafes, turns like a lizard following a fly to stare at this woman, the dignity of her title. He takes down an atlas, flicks through the index, lays the great book on the tooled leather table, mellow with banking and peace. Her country lies open before us. She leads in explaining its story. The Soviets have left. The soil is exhausted. Their coastline was gulped by Ukraine. We stand there bent to the page, like the sunflowers we passed in the fields that dipped their great heads to beg grace. She shrugs, folds her arms in defiance, refuses to shrink or back off. None of us can find a thing to say. I learned afterwards that Moldova was the poorest country in Europe, still is, I think, and is still caught in a terrible situation between ideologies. This next one is called Tangles. It's in memory of my cousin Rosaline, who was a doctor in Australia, but was tied to Australia because she had 4 Australian sons, but she used to come back and do locums in Ireland because she liked the rain in her face. We spent a lot of time with them when they too lived in Ireland as a young family, and so we shared a childhood. And those memories that go so far back are very difficult to unravel from yourself and to let them go. How can I begin to unwind you? Oh, I should also have said that she had cancer for a long time. She had cancer for 17 years. So it got to the stage where you thought, because she'd lived so long, you thought she wasn't going to die. How can I begin to unwind you from out of my life, which had bobbined a shared wooden reel since our childhood, shone the damp mornings, the waves that licked at our feet, the milk from the banded jug. Both of us, trapped inside matter, joyous and sorrowful, amazed at all the long life stretched ahead. Now matter has hardened to hardship, but still I could not want you released into the marvelous life. I'm going to read a short poem which is called Shell People. It was actually written in Spain, but Aoife, living in the Highlands, will, I'm sure, spend a lot of time with her young children on beaches not unlike this. It's the sand under my feet, the very fine, very white sand, and the shells in the dunes, sea holly, succulents. It's this that makes me feel weightless and outside of time, because it is always, always there, back in time. Not the childhood of buckets and spades, but the childhood of back, such a long, long way back, when the barefooted two legs squatted, their calls small, anxious and shy, like lost birds. Maybe we'll get there again, who knows? I'm going to finish this bit with a long poem called Black Radishes. The story was told to me by a Dutch woman who lived not far, she was a very fine and internationally recognized ceramic artist, and she lived not far from where I live, and we shared the same external landscape for 30 odd years, but internally we had very different landscapes. She had been a child in Holland in the Nazi invasion, and her father had been shot. There was a very savage regime which was basically based on starving the Dutch resistance, and also whenever anyone was shot, they would take out a whole bunch of prisoners and just shoot them randomly. I mean, whenever anyone, a German was shot. And at the end of the war, she was sent to Switzerland again. She was sent to Switzerland for feeding. The Dutch children were packaged up and sent on a train to Switzerland. It's really not pro or against anything. It's about what happens after wars. We went there on her birthday, a white evening early in springtime. She was working in her garden among the earthed up rows of dark green leafy plants she called black radishes, beans more advanced than anyone else's, tulips red with gold blazes leaning to the sun. A garden is a lovesome thing. I threw her the quote as I stood on the path, filled with envy and happiness. She smiled. It wasn't a real smile. It was tired from sadness and being misunderstood. We followed her up the stairs. Beads lay on the table. Above it, in the roof window, an emptiness of light. She was used to it now, she said, this new window, threading beads by daylight. Wild cherry and ash netted spaces of sky. Away off, a blue hill peered over the river plain. Just the same, you could tell she had lost some safety. There are bits of prose interspersed in the poetry in this, and this is one of them. She brought out cake and sat in a high-backed chair, talking about war in Holland in her childhood, how her mother had got flour, an egg or two, some anniversary, everyone starving. Her mother breaking an egg into the white bowl, the telephone ringing, lifting the receiver, hearing the message, putting down the receiver, saying the words aloud. Her mother understood them, and then she did. Off in the dunes, they had just shot her father. I asked if her father had finished the cake. I suppose I wanted to know if her mother had finished the cake. I suppose I wanted to know if cake mattered, even when they were shooting your father, your husband. If you were hungry enough, that is. She smiled, the same as before. Then she started to tell us about when it ended. She had told us before. I don't know why she needed to tell it over again, slowly on this still, pale evening. The trainload of Dutch children sent to Switzerland for feeding, the train traveling days in fits and starts through ruined Germany, how it stopped one night at a platform in a camp, and they were taken from it, and they lay in those wooden bunks where Jews had lain. The place was chock-a-block with dead Jews, tier on tier, right to the ceiling. I thought it must be the garden, the lovely quiet order of it, domestic, vulnerable. I thought of our garden, how it slopes to the white thorns, how it's there reproachful, to be attended, to be neglected, mostly weedy, part overgrown, like a scullery that will one day be ordered and therefore joyous, but until then goes on the way it is. Her garden is not like that. There the songbird sings on the branch of the tree where the hanged man swings. So the words must be taken carefully, one by one, from their flat, dark box with its fading indigo velvet. One more time and one more time, the dead must be honored. I thought then of a time when we will need to live less carelessly. I'll sow black radishes and care for them so that they thrive. Thank you.
Thank you, Kerry, for that powerful poem to end your set. We're now going to hear from Aoife, and at the end of her reading, we're going to see and hear a film poem of one of her poems called Torch.
Thank you very much. This first poem in this set that I'll read is called Sotoris, and it is the sound of wind through leaves, and it feels particularly appropriate with my croaky voice just now. You will get to hear what I normally sound like in the video. Sotoris. You will not sleep, so I sing you a world of plants and flowers, fields and rivers. I sing until the trees grow up around me, until my toes gnarl and knuckle to the floor. I sing until the words transpire from my throat, flow over chapped lips, crack like bark. I sing until the rings of recitation grow and tighten like drought, until my body sways in the breeze of the only song that will settle you. I sing until you are sound asleep and listen to your breath hushing through the leaves. I think the record one night was 17 times I sang one song until the children were asleep. But then you have the next morning. Chaos. the darkness before there is light or sky to hold it. When there are no shadows because there is no sun to cast them, no land for them to land on. When the sea does not move because there is no moon to move for. And the stars are nothing more than pencil marks on plans. When the world is filled with plants and trees unmade, with no wind yet to shake or spread them. When the animals of land and sea and sky wait inside our books and songs and hands, and we the masters of them all. Soon there will be light, but for now, all is quiet and all is well, and I, the only one awake in this our almost universe. And this next one I wrote quite soon, perhaps not quite soon, but certainly after we were allowed to go out and start walking again. And it was a bit more relaxed. Things were feeling a little bit more normal. Towpath. There is a crow on the towpath, dipping its beak in and out of a shattered blue egg. Its beak is slathered in yolk that yellows the ground like gorse. It stops and it watches me. Miles from home, I want to turn back. This is not a straight path or a narrow one, but there is no other way of living. If I leave now, that egg will follow me home, and I will sit on it for days until it hatches into something else that is not mine. So I walk on, cross and cross over the loch until it is all forgotten. The crow full or frightened away by families, friends, or tourists. The shell crushed or pushed into the grass. The yolk scuffed gently with dust. And with the video coming on shortly, I will just read 2, possibly 3 short poems from a sequence called The Distributor, which is a stretch of road about a mile long that I used to walk 4 times a day, once up and down in the morning for drop off, and then again in the afternoon for pickup. And I just became astonished at the things I would find on the side of this road. 2, side mirror. Flung across the path and into the ditch, it lies there unblinking. A crowd of branches angle for the space to look into its face, count themselves lucky. Shrubs scratch the sclera like last night's mascara, and still it stares up at a sky it's never seen before, wondering when the sun will come out from behind the clouds and overtake it, knowing things like that are always closer than they appear. Or badger. I know the swaddled shape of it, the rise of rump that obscures for 5 steps more or 6, his striped head, his picture book snout. It is an uncomfortable story. The traffic, my body and yours and his, turned against a wall as hard and weathered as an artery. I cannot keep you safe from both. I promise to call for help and tell you when you ask me after school that they arrived in a warm blue van, thanked us for our trouble and carried him away. Not that the line went dead when they asked me, is it still alive? In the time it took his last imagined breath to stir the fallen leaves. lots of other things I found on that road, but the most surprising of which was a young girl who, anyway, it'll all be explained. 7, dandelion girl. Legs and arms growing like weeds, I find her at the side of the road. She is no lion-toothed girl, no timekeeper. Late for school, locked out and lost, her tender roots wrap round my hands like fingers. Her yellow fear whitens with the breath of every question. Each reply, a seed, a sail, a parachute, until her head is full of yearnings, longing to disperse. Thank you.
A small thing with coloured discs that slip between the light and lens. It projects a host of carnivores across our doors and walls until one frame is just an eye, big enough to dream. I make a trick of hiding it and leave a moon for you to swell and shrink with insatiable orbit. Determined to explore the deepest corners of our makeshift den, you discover lost worlds behind the curtains, figures fossilized in dust, their shadows moon dark beside missing bricks and bits of breakfast, feral socks and stickers with the mass and magnitude of asteroids. And behind the couch, full of stars and covered in dust, a yellow balloon, silent now and small, knowing it was born from the dust the light is dancing for, that it too was once a star.
Well, that was lovely to hear that poem read and see that film at the end of the reading. Before we go into the discussion, Kerry Hardie has asked that I should read this evening a poem by the great Polish poet Zbigniew Herbert, and she particularly wanted me to read the envoy of Mr. Cogito, dedicated to Alexei Navalny in the light of horrible news of his death, his killing. Zbigniew Herbert invented a persona called in Polish Pan Cogito, that is Mr. Cogito, Cartesian thought given human body. And Mr. Cogito functions as the poet's alter ego, one who rejects the blurred, compromised landscape of communism, a place where truth and the solidity of language have been eroded, as we're seeing now again. This poem comes from his 1974 collection, Mr. Cogito, and he wrote dozens more Mr. Cogito poems, which appeared in a number of collections over several decades. And the character himself became a mythical figure, while embedded in many of the Cogito poems are also allusions to classical mythology, legend, and history. And he was able to use the figure of Cogito to be very critical of the communist regime that he was then living under in Poland. And the poem is translated by John and Bogdana Carpenter. It's from this book published by Oxford University Press, first published in 1977 in translation. So I'm going to go now to the poem. Find it. Just a second. Okay, the envoy of Mr. Cogito. Go where those others went into the dark boundary, for the golden fleece of nothingness, your last prize. Go upright among those who are on their knees, among those with their backs turned and those toppled in the dust. You were saved, not in order to live. You have given little time. You must give testimony. Be courageous when the mind deceives you. Be courageous in the final account. Only this is important. And let your helpless anger be like the sea. Whenever you hear the voice of the insulted and beaten, let your sister scorn, not leave you. For the informers, executioners, cowards, they will win. They will go to your funeral, and with relief will throw a lump of earth. The woodworm will write your smoothed over biography. And do not forgive truly. It is not in your power to forgive in the name of those betrayed at dawn. Beware, however, of unnecessary pride. Keep looking at your clown's face in the mirror. Repeat, I was called. Weren't there better ones than I? Beware of dryness of heart. Love the morning spring, the bird with an unknown name, the winter oak, light on a wall, the splendor of the sky. They don't need your warm breath. They're there to say, no one will console you. Be vigilant when the light on the mountains gives the sign. Arise and go as long as blood turns in the breast, your dark star. Repeat old incantations of humanity, fables and legends, because this is how you will attain the good. You will not attain, repeat great words, repeat them stubbornly, like those crossing the desert who perished in the sand, and they will reward you with what they have at hand, with a whip of laughter, with murder on a garbage heap. Go, because only in this way will you be admitted to the company of cold skulls, to the company of your ancestors, Gilgamesh, Hector, Roland, the defenders of the kingdom without limit and the city of ashes. Be faithful, go. So that was Zbigniew Herbert. And I'd now like to invite the poets in to have a discussion. And if anyone watching wants to put a question in the chat, that will be passed on to us. But we'll start talking about the books. And I'd like to start off by asking Kerry about the Zbigniew Herbert poem and what it means to her and how it connects with her own poetry, perhaps.
Thank you, Neil. Thanks very much for reading it so well. I first came across this poem when I was had a residency in Hawthornden, and I was done. I don't usually like public poetry. It's very much a public poem. I was stunned by its courage, the sheer bravery of it, and as I was stunned by Nawalski's courage in doing what he knew would be a disaster. And I think that I thought that Mandelstam was a long time ago, and suddenly here it was, the same thing back again. The death in the prison camp or on the way to the prison camp. And I also think that it is particularly important time for us to pick up words, not guns. Those heroes that he mentioned at the end of the poem, Gilgamesh, Roland, Hector, they were heroes, but they were heroes with swords. But here in our time was a man who was a hero with words. And I think that more and more it is getting difficult to separate ourselves from the collective, to think independently, and to speak, because speaking is really important and we're all afraid to speak. And for myself, it gets more frightening to speak because of the internet and because you never know who's watching what and what will go where. So that's why I asked you to read it in homage to him.
Mm. And your poem Black Radishes also connects with it in a way, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. It does. Sonia didn't want me to read it in her lifetime because she said it was too recognizable. But and it clearly the whole experience of in Holland was deeply scarring for her. But I thought it was appropriate now because there's Palestine, there's Israel, there's what the Jews again are going through, what other people are going. the whole wreck of the war that ruined Germany, the whole wreck that war leaves us. And I feel very strongly that Europe is filling up with guns and the Middle East is filling up with guns, and guns don't go away. And words are our only hope.
Yeah. Well, it's difficult to know where to go now from that, but maybe I could go to Aoife, because in a sense, writing about children and purity and innocence is the complete opposite of that. And I was wondering whether you could talk a little about how you approach doing that.
It's interesting that you say that it's kind of the opposite, because you find yourself when you're writing, it's finding the balance of knowing what's happening in the world and knowing what you want them to understand is happening in their world, or the power that they have to influence and change the world. Certainly the things they watch and read are a lot more empowering than what we grew up with. But it's interesting because I'm working on something at the moment. And what we like to do when there's dew and first frost is we go out and we look for the spider webs and how beautiful they are on the neighbors' hedges and everything. And I say, oh, look at the lovely patterns. And this is a great thing to do on the walk to school. And then in my head, I wanted to tell them that it's, spider web, it's amazing. It's so strong. It can be used for bulletproof vests. But I didn't say it out loud because I suddenly had this moment of going, I don't want them to know that. I don't want them to know that bulletproof vests exist and why they need to exist, and what people do to each other. So I think part of when you're writing in and about children in those moments of purity, it's almost as much to capture the sense that there will have been a time when I have been able to form their kind of boundaries of understanding, but also have the responsibility of them as well. And I think it's a delicate balance, because I think you can't be naive and safe, but you can also end up, things can be overwhelming, things can be frightening. So what can you do to kind of help children with that? I don't believe in the idea of resilience. That's what I call the R word in my house. But that's a whole separate conversation. But it's how do you? Because again, when we were children, we saw the news. We saw the news at 6 o'clock. We saw the news at 9 o'clock. But now it's so pervasive. And I wonder if Kerry and Fleur would have an opinion on how they've noticed the difference in how these events are reported and the frequency, and if they felt a difference in themselves, either when they're writing about it or when they're hearing about it.
I worked for the BBC in Belfast at the start of the Troubles, and I remember very clearly that we did not show bodies by the side of the road. Well, now bodies are all over the place. So I think you're quite right in saying that there is a great difference between what now and then. The actual rules of the newsroom seem to have radically changed. What is permissible to show has radically changed. I wonder how it is coarsening our sensibilities. I know violence coarsens our sensibilities. I think that what you say about the space of love you create for your children is very, very important. I think that's a resilience, which will keep them there, hold for them all their lives. It won't necessarily work. Like Mr. Cogito says, it doesn't necessarily work, but it's still important.
So Fleur, in your work, you've got poems about parent and child. You've got We Are Kind to Snails at the end of your poems. You've got that awareness of how a child sees the world. Do you want to say anything on that? You're muted.
Yep. I've got a poem long ago about grandchildren hiding under the table when the Americans were bombing. Where were they bombing? Afghanistan? I can't remember. It's so pervasive. and they were saying they didn't want to die. Well, I'm glad that this new little child is in New Zealand together with all of my descendants, safest place for them. And that's the way I look at it is, well, the sooner I get out, the better. And I didn't ask to be 90, but it seems to be happening. And I'd like to just sort of slip away and leave them to get on with it. I'm very sorry they have to. I couldn't believe what was happening to this world. When I was 70, I thought I was getting lung cancer, and I was delighted I said, I miss global warming. And if only that had been all, I didn't miss any of it. But anyway, no.
When you were a child, you actually got evacuated to
Oh yes, but
England during the war.
kids
And
don't.
you've written about that also, about your father's.
We weren't frightened. We weren't frightened. We just thought that was something grown-ups made a fuss about. We were told that if we heard the doodlebugs, we had to run home from the woods where we were playing. It was school holidays. And our mother looked out of the window anxiously, and we thought, oh, what a lot of nonsense. They're not going to fall on us. We're us. They don't care that you're you. So I suppose there's a sort of armor plate built into the natural childhood somehow. I don't know.
Those children are immortal anyway. That's what you feel as a child, that
Yes,
everything else that happens is somewhere else.
I
exactly.
think on one level we all think we're immortal.
Mhm.
Yes. Well,
That we do think that somehow we'll get away with it.
Turning to the books themselves, you've got each other's books, and I was wondering whether there's anything you'd like to ask each other about your books or your work in general.
I don't so much want to ask. I want to praise and say thank you for reading that one, and thank you for reading that one. You've been picking up my favorite poems. I mean, the one about the Moldovan woman. I'm thinking of my friends in Romania who'd been through terrible things before we met them. And oh, the distributor. I loved the distributor. I was hoping that people would read poems from that. And sure enough, she did. And particularly the one about the mirror. It's a particular kind of imagination to be able to invade the consciousness of an inanimate object and say things like that don't usually come so close.
So it's for me, my biggest curiosity is obviously the two of you have had such prolific careers, and wondering really how we know when you look back at your first couple of collections, does that feel like they've come from somewhere else? Does that feel like?
I find them completely embarrassing. People keep quoting that poem about my son and the snail, for God's sake. I mean, it's bad enough for me, but he had to live with it because that was on a school syllabus when he was in New Zealand as a young person. Really. No, I was getting all my influences from literature rather than from life. My background was classics, so I studied the Roman love poets. And Propertius, one of the first poem in my collected, I think, is the one about Propertius, and all of that sex and drugs and garlands from the party.
I love that Christmas poem. I think I need to start putting that in cards.
Thank you.
Yeah, I do too.
And all those people at that party are dead, I think. Certainly my good friends Meg and Alex. But we've got the memories.
And isn't that a lovely way, I think, for them to be remembered by other people, just in the prime of, let's just spend time together and enjoy it in that moment. And
yes, that's it. That's all there is.
mm-hmm.
I liked your sequence of Northumberland, Fleur, very much. I liked your Northumberland sequence very much.
What was
The
that?
Hotspur ones.
Oh, the Hotspur one. Oh, yes.
Was that fun to write?
It was great. It was my first introduction to the North and Northumberland. I met Gillian Whitehead, who's a very good friend of mine, still alive, thank God, wonderful composer. She's a New Zealander, and I was introduced to her at New Zealand House. And we were both, she was up there as composer in residence. It was her second year, and I was just about to go up there for my first year as writer in residence. So we decided to write this piece about Hotspur. Not the Hotspur that you get in Shakespeare, somebody called Kate, but to Elizabeth Percy, who was the actual Elizabeth. And we wrote it. It was performed all over the place in New Zealand.
Was it hard to stage? Or
Oh,
was it music, just musically?
that was just a monody. Anyway, it was for one singer and an orchestra and some banners. An artist called Gretchen Albrecht designed some banners to go on the behind the singer and the small instrumental group. So
it was very effective.
Yes, I was filled with love for Northumberland. I used to sit in the Lytton Phil reading all about the history and guzzling it up. And
I wanted to ask Kerry if you could tell me a little bit more about Just Another Bomb, Belfast 1974.
It's dedicated to my sister. It was just the time when it was the most violent part of the Troubles, and it was just what it said in the poem. I was sitting in my bedsit and I heard a bomb if a bomb is very close, the sound is very muffled. So I knew it was very close, and I knew where it must be, and I knew that my sister was supposed to meet someone in that bar. And so it was then about the going down the stairs and going out to what I thought was going to be the carnage. It was a carnage, but my sister wasn't in it because whoever she arranged to meet hadn't been there, so she'd come back outside to wait for her. But I actually wrote that poem when the daughter of a neighbour, somebody rang the doorbell in the summer at the same time of year, with the same light rainfall, and at about the same time of night, about 10 o'clock at night, and said, "Have you heard that so-and-so has died?" And because I was a close friend of her mother's and her father's, I got straight into the car and went to their house. And the next day, but at the time I remember distinctly thinking, I got away with that one. I'm not going to get away with this one, because I knew that Barbara was there. So the next day I wrote it. It's interesting recall memory, what will trigger very intensely, because I think that poem is quite intense because it suddenly opened the door to that memory very strongly.
So I mean, because that was when I read it, I first was that written near and around the same time, or had something to the side? Because I can often find that I will be doing something completely different and it will suddenly go, oh, that makes me think of this thing from 5 years ago. And that's
Yes.
that poem ends up being about the thing from 5 years ago, not the thing I sat down to write, which of course is what happens most of the time.
Yeah, I think that is what happened. It's interesting that happens to you too. Does it happen to you, Fleur? That you will suddenly, something will trigger something?
Yes. Well,
far along.
as with my Afghanistan poem, it suddenly took me.
Yes.
2002.
Yes, of course.
We have these triggered. I remember a bomb I heard. The only bomb I heard up close was outside the Europa Hotel in Belfast, when somebody posted a letter bomb in a pillar box just outside the hotel, and that was just my one tiny taste of something incident. My ancestors came from Northern Ireland, or some of them did, so I was very interested in being there. And I had that one experience. But
Were you reading in Belfast?
I was going to be doing something. I was waiting with something I was going to be doing was, I think, the Belfast Festival. It was probably starting the next morning or something. But I just happened to be in the dining room eating. Somebody else paid for my dinner. Some man.
Well,
Of course, we
there
did.
were an awful lot of bombs in Europa.
Oh, I know. Yes,
Yeah.
yes. I just
But-
happened to be there for one of them.
Sorry?
I just happened to be there for one of them. I was, I had no excuse really for being there.
You didn't need an excuse. We were very glad of anyone who would brave the dreadful reputation we had and come. I had an aunt who lived south of the border who would not set foot north of it. So it was,
Bombs. It's people I'm frightened of, not bombs.
well, people make bombs.
But bombs are so sudden. It's over and done with. You don't even notice when you're dead. It's
As long as you are dead and not one of the
it's
injured.
not just your arms and legs, and you
Yeah.
still got the rest of you.
Yeah, I agree with that completely.
But
Well,
Does it frighten you? I was very conscious, Aoife, when I was reading your book, that this was that I'm reaching the end portion of my life, and you're setting your children out on a journey into their lives, and I was very conscious that, like Fleur, I feel not unhappy that I'm going to avoid an awful lot of what's coming. So I was very conscious of how much fear you had, or how much fear you didn't have, and how you block things. Because I think a lot of those memory poems come from, we've blocked it. The way Fleur had obviously blocked the tragedy of her nephew's death in Afghanistan. So we blocked it a bit, and then it comes out.
And I certainly think with some of it, for me anyway, a lot of these poems in the collection, while I wrote them in those early weeks and months, it wasn't until I went to Cove Park in July 2021 that I actually went back and did more than a first draft. Because I couldn't, my mind couldn't do anything beyond a first draft, because like a lot of people, a lot of poets and novelists, they just couldn't write. Their brain suddenly went, I need to be able to have barriers melt away between things. I need to be able to let my mind wander. But when you're very conscious of where everybody is and how close everybody is and what you're going to get in the shops, your brain has so many barriers and obstacles. You can't let anything kind of meld and blend. And it's very much with them. I mean, part of it for us in the sense we live up in the Highlands. So we have a very kind of nice community where we step out of our front door and there is woodland and there is space and we see the mountains. And I think that has a lot to do with it, that whatever's happening on any given day, we can go out and we can be in woodland. Or, we're 5 miles away from Loch Ness. So we go down to our bottom of our hill and we turn left. And you can go and sit at Loch Ness and be surrounded by those mountains. And for me, there's a great sense of grounding in being in things that are not man-made, being in things that are not controlled by people or determined by people. And I think there's a sense in that is calming, but I also think it's reassuring, and it kind of brings a sense of temporality to everything else. I'm going, I am overwhelmed by this thing that has happened today. I'm going to get in the car and I'm going to sit by the lock. I'm going to remember that this lock has been here for how many hundreds of thousands of years. The thing that's bothering me wouldn't even be a ripple on the surface. And I think that's a part of it as well, is going, because again, like we mentioned earlier, when we have that pervasive sense of the news, you can be overwhelmed because you can get the news in so many ways all the time, from friends, from family, from social media. And there can be a sense where things can be incredibly overwhelming. And what we've done a couple of times in our own house is we've had to go, okay, what's happening now? In your life right now, we are in the kitchen. We are sitting at the kitchen table. we are safe, we are well. Say like the kids are in bed or the kids are at school. This is all that there is now. And then we just keep it like that for maybe 20 minutes, half an hour. Because you can feel like you're in the middle of all of these wars and conflicts, not in a physical sense, but in that emotional feel of you know, you see an ad for jeans and then you see a picture of an atrocity, and then you see an ad for a television program, and then you see an appeal for help because there's been an earthquake. And I don't think the human mind was ever meant to oscillate between so many different emotions so quickly. I think it's incredibly unnatural, but I think going back into nature, or, you know, disconnecting from everything and literally just going, my body is in this space. And that's all that can happen. And that's all where that's all I can be. And it's all that I am at this moment. And trying to bring that sense of yourself back into a core. And I think putting that into the kids is probably the best thing that I can do. And going, okay, start again. What can I do? What can I sign? What can I donate to? What can I do? What can I do rather than what can't I do? But I think that comes from saying I am here and then going from there.
That's why I thought the Mr. Cogito piece was so important, because
Very
he's
much
saying,
so.
yeah.
Because I think if you lose the
He's
sense
saying,
of yourself,
he's saying, speak now, and don't expect results.
yeah. But I think it's also, like you said, people being afraid to speak and talk.
Yeah, because of this plethora of imagery that you're talking about, and because we are overwhelmed, it's very difficult to make enough space around yourself, around your mind.
But I think it's also as well, because we hear so many voices, we can forget about the power of our voice and the power of our body, like with the power of protest. We think we're just one body, but if our one body is with 100,000 other one bodies, suddenly there's something to say and people are listening. And I think a lot of rhetoric at the moment is being designed to make individuals feel like they can't really do anything. And there's a lot of systems being put in place to try and prevent those individuals coming together as a collective. And I think that's also feeding into the wider problems that we're seeing in other parts of the world at the moment.
Well, thank you, Aoife. I think at this point we actually need to wind up and let our audiences go off and get a cup of tea or whatever. So thank you, Aoife and Fleur and Kerry. Kerry and Aoife, as I said earlier, will be reading in Hodges Figures in Dublin on Thursday, and Fleur's next reading will be at St Andrews in Stanza, Scotland's Poetry Festival, Scotland's International Poetry Festival in March. So thank you very much, and I hope you've all enjoyed the readings and the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Neil.
Thank you. Lovely to talk to the other poets.
Yes.
Lovely to talk to you.
Hope your voices improve before your
Yes.
Dublin.